Hello, everybody, and welcome to the webinar, The Next Era of Agri-Food and Health. My name is Josh Haslam, Senior Director here at Lux Research, and I'm going to be joined today by my colleague, Harini Van Conterman, Associate Research Director here at Lux Research for the Agri-Food and Health Program. Now, throughout the webinar, you can type any questions you have in the questions box on the screen, and time permitting, we'll answer all the questions we can. But if your question doesn't get answered, please do not hesitate to email it to questions@luxresearchinc.com, and we'll definitely respond. Also, if at any point you experience any technical difficulties, frozen screen, things like that, simply refresh your browser and check that your internet connection is strong. With that, I want to go ahead and jump into the webinar today. Again, today we're focused on the next era of agri-food and health, and this is an overview of some updates to the research we're doing and looking into the future of agri-food and health. And to start off, I want to talk about some changes, right? Why are we doing this now, and what's changing as we think about this particular industry? And I think overall, as you can see in the slides, I think we've seen some market conditions shift, and they're shifting towards growth, which is a really good sign after a very difficult, I would say, 2024 and probably part of the way through 2025. If we look on the right, you'll see a figure that points to growth quarterly for leading companies across agriculture, ingredients, and specialty chemicals, as well as food and beverage. And I think we see a couple really important signals in this data. Again, this is 2024 data, but moving into 2025, I think it was a good signal for what was coming. And for food and beverage, for instance, at the top of the screen in pink, we see that we were coming out of a pretty difficult time into a period of growth, or at least starting a period of growth. And yes, the beginning of 2025 is difficult, particularly as we had numerous different ingredients on the chopping block. But that has stabilized somewhat, and now we're beginning to move forward, and lots of companies are making very bold moves to grow and expand portfolios in that regard. Now, as we kind of move in the supply chain, for instance, for ingredients, especially chemicals, companies like that, we've seen kind of a little bit different story. We've seen more consistent growth. Demand has been solid, but the cost of commodities has been a little bit lower. And so while we're seeing growth, we also see that ingredients and specialty chemicals are looking for new opportunities, and that's been the major shift in 2025. And some companies beginning to succeed there. So it's a great signal to see and continue to see that growth. Now, for agriculture, has been a continued more difficult area, but I think coming out of a period of slower growth, we're beginning, mainly due to low commodity prices, we're beginning to see some signs of growth in late 2025 as companies shift. We're moving more simplistic again, kind of controlling some of the diversification factors that lead to challenges in portfolios, and we'll talk a little bit about that later. But as we get into this, we also want to talk about what's driving these shifts, right? As we move towards this better period of growth, what's actually causing that? And I think a few things are at the head of this. First, we see companies really shifting back to the core, right? We see companies focused on innovations that target core feedstocks that are paramount to success of the company, and identifying technologies that can actually do that. And that's where we kind of move to the next box here, where we're really moving from novelty to reprioritization. There's a lot of tech out there, and we've done a lot of innovation over the last 8 years, but we haven't necessarily, as an industry and an ecosystem at large, focused that. And so we really need to move from chance to change for impact. And I think that really requires reprioritization. We're beginning to see that in biomanufacturing, which is really good. And we'll talk a little bit more about those details later on in the webinar. And then lastly, I think one of the big changes we're seeing is a move from focusing on sustainability as a very broad term to more focused version of that in the form of resilience. And that means we're focusing on supply chain needs that focus on the core, so that you can really improve the bottom line of your organization, protect it from disruption, and move towards a period where you can communicate very clearly what your goals are, why they're your goals, and the impact on the organization at large. These are big shifts for innovation at large. And this kind of takes us to the talk for today. As Lux went and evaluated these different areas, what we did was take first and foremost a very client-centric approach. We looked at the types of clients that we work with and evaluated what innovation looked like and where innovation was shifting. We'll go over the methodology for that, but once we did that, we actually did was look at and develop client priorities and really shifted our coverage from an overall CPG focus back to an agri-food and health, particularly for nutrition focus, and did that so that innovation leaders, right, could make better decisions. And so, what we're going to do is round out by discussing what our new priorities are, but then also talk about after that, and to close out, how you can capitalize on these priorities, where are your best bets, and what type of information and strategies you need to go in as you come into planning, right, for the new year here. So with that, I want to jump right in and talk a bit about our methodology we use to analyze, update priorities, and come up with new strategies for innovation moving forward. So if you see the figure here, what did we do? When we say consumer-centric, what does that entail? And first and foremost, it starts with looking at companies that matter. And in this particular case, we're looking at over 30 companies that are leading in agriculture, leading in ingredients, chemicals, materials, and food and beverage, and looking at those leaders to say, what are the innovation foci? We then also have over 2,500 questions that the Lux community has asked over the last year, and also 1,000 different innovation projects that we're tracking at any given point in time. That's our Lux proprietary information, and together, if we take that, we can actually use natural language processing to leverage topic modeling to synthesize some potential themes. What we then do is look at those themes as experts ourselves and conduct interviews with leading innovators in order to bring those down to key priorities. And what we landed on were 6 key priorities that involve over 100 different technologies that we're monitoring on an ongoing basis. And you might ask yourself what those priorities are. And kind of moving forward, we have these 6. First and foremost is enhanced health and reduced harm. Second is resilience building. Third, we have growth through the bioeconomy. 4th, purposeful innovation. 5, impactful packaging. And 6th, which pervades everything we cover, is policy and regulations, as it's driving a lot of the decisions that we need to make, right? Whether it's disruption or whether it's markets opening up. And it's not just about having those topics, but also saying, what's the priority level as we move across these different topics? And if you look at how companies across the agri-food ecosystem are prioritizing innovation across these priorities, it's pretty clear, one, that enhanced health and reduced harm is the major lever to pull. Over 85% of companies have moved to leverage some form of strategy around enhanced health and reduced harm for their innovation structure moving forward. 79% are focused on resilience building, and that is a big shift from just sustainability. It's much more focused and targeted. 65% focused on growth through the bioeconomy, 55% on purposeful innovation, 50% on impactful packaging. And if you look across all these, really policy and regulations pervades all of them. So really this is 100% of all, but it's less of a technology topic, more of something around, right, market opening and disruption. So really policy and regulations pervades everything we do. Now, that's a very high level look at what our priorities are today. So what I want to do now is pass to my colleague, Harini Venkatraman, who leads our Agri-Food and Health program here at Lux, to talk a little bit more about those priorities and what they actually entail. Harini?
Absolutely. We're going to dive a little bit deeper into each of these priorities and understand some of the key innovation questions and what some of the leaders are thinking about and what technologies are gaining traction. I'm going to start with the first priority here, And I think Josh already pointed out that this is pretty much, center of a lot of the company's innovation plan here. Enhancing health and reducing harm, I think is very much important. And for us here at Lux, I think we're covering that across the value chain, right? Whether you're an agriculture player, you're a food player, or a feed player, I think it really brings a lot of your focus back into how do you extend and how do you, strengthen your portfolio with health forward-looking products. So this also resonates a lot in terms of how agri-food companies are navigating a dual challenge, right? They want to really enable better outcomes, but also minimizing that harm part of it. And here is where we see that there's an evolution of better for you ingredients, and the winners are those which are definitely going to link consumer needs to innovation scalability. That's really the reason why we are witnessing a momentum for technologies like functional health ingredients or addressing ultra processed food innovation through sugar or fat reduction. The important point here is a lot of the companies, whether you're an ingredient player or food and beverage company, I think we're seeing is a lot of this is connected to that scientific evidence that could push some of these next generation health ingredients forward. A good example, just to kind of showcase this innovation in action, is what happened with PepsiCo. Pepsi just invested about $2 billion in this acquisition of Poppy. If you look at Poppy's portfolio, it really fits with the momentum for functional health ingredients, specifically the intersection of gut health and a low sugar offerings. Really tying functionality and health impact together, it's becoming core competitive need for a lot of companies. So as I mentioned, we're going to see a lot more of this type of diversification strategies, but still really focusing on your core and health being the major enabling element here. I'm going to move to the next one here, which is resilience building. Resilience building is an interesting one, the way Josh laid out, right? The industry's moved away from sustainability, but it's really resilience that's really driving a lot of the decisions, specifically for sourcing, for supply chain agility, and all of that. So the priority is definitely around how do you build resilience? How do you mitigate some of these geopolitical instability, extreme climate risks, or even tightening some of these land use restrictions that are forcing agri-food companies to really think beyond their existing supply chain. We're seeing a lot of the climate challenge ingredients. For example, about 90% of the raw materials that big food and beverage companies are sourcing today still rely on land and animal agriculture. I think that's going to make both the sourcing, the processing, and the manufacturing element very important, which is why we are seeing definitely interest in technologies like advanced membranes and how do you recover water, nutrients, and all of that. Now, a good example, again, here for innovation in action is the one from Unilever. Now, Unilever is a big CPG with multiple different product lines, right? Focusing both on food, personal care, and all of that. And one of the key raw materials in this case is palm oil. And 99% of that is still land agriculture based. So they expanded their partnership with a company called Satelligence. And what it really does is provide geospatial intelligence to be able to monitor the deforestation risk. And this is not only for palm, but it can be across many other commodities, which companies like Unilever use. The important part here is really the data-driven intervention and how that can help companies reduce use, strengthen compliance, but also really stay ahead of some of these regional disruptions, which you're seeing even with the UDR getting delayed to 2026. I think there's a lot to unpack there through resilience building. Right, we're going to move to the third priority here, which is growth through the bioeconomy. This one is an interesting one in a way that the whole concept of building a bioeconomy and biomanufacturing, being an enabler for that, has been there for a number of years. However, what we're seeing now is that biotech still remains an important lever for growth, but embedding that into the legacy food systems, specifically for ingredients, that's where the real friction lies. you have to take into account cost, scale, regulatory clarity, and then to layer that on with consumer perception. I think that makes it a very difficult path to navigate. So what we are now seeing is companies are really treating biotech as an enhancer of existing ingredient capabilities and not as a replacement. So alternatives are important. However, can you do more value with your current core, whether it's an enzymatic process or a cell-free transformation? Is there anything that you could do to add direct value to your core, to your raw materials through fermentation? I think that is a big focus area. And the goal here is also to be able to focus and invest on technologies that would actually help move the needle there. We're going to see a lot more of the focus coming back into how do you scale and move from pilots to actually industrial scale, commercial scale for a lot of different industries. And the innovation case here that I wanted to highlight is Vivici. So DSM Firmenich had a joint venture with Fonterra, which is a dairy company called Vivici. And through this venture, what they wanted to do is really produce some of those precision fermentation derived ingredients at scale. So one of the first targets is whey protein. And what Vivici managed to do now is produce them at a 75,000 liter scale. Working with the bio-based pilot plant here in Belgium. It's also expanding to other high-value ingredients like lactoferrin, for example. So what we're beginning to see is that how biomanufacturing is it's not just for the sake of doing any ingredient or alternative, but truly being able to address the performance and functionality needs for your value chains. So I think we're going to see a lot more of this type of innovation coming into the picture for 2026 and even going beyond there. The next one is purposeful innovation. This is pretty new in terms of how we want to think about making innovation more purposeful. I'm not saying that innovation today is not purposeful, but this is really about addressing the need for tighter alignment between R&D, consumer teams, and operational feasibility. Traditionally, that's not the case, right? Working with ingredient companies, food and beverage companies, you could see that there is the silo. And that is where I think the data-driven discovery, digital reformulation, or even going beyond for personalization use cases can really come into play. And what it can do is either reduce the development cost or accelerate product market fit. While all of this could be done, taking into account the consumer's jobs to be done. I think that's an element that traditionally a lot of the R&D teams are not taking into account, but we're seeing through purposeful innovation, this is really coming into life now. And a good example here, again, to talk about is what Mondelez did with the launch of their VR center. I think they recently launched that in 2025. And through this VR virtual reality center, what they're trying to do is to be able to test prototypes, collaborate across different markets. And they have a lot of different markets and needs that they have to address for these particular markets. And by doing so, they're able to cut the physical testing cycles. I think that's a big need of the hour in terms of cutting down cost. So purposeful innovation really means prioritizing solutions that can scale effectively while you can keep up pace with the consumer expectations. So think about that across different areas that you're looking at. Last but not the least, we're going to jump into impactful packaging. Again, note here that this priority is impactful packaging and not sustainable packaging, right? I think packaging has moved beyond that sustainability narrative. It's a lot about performance first. You're seeing that brands need to look at elements like freshness, reducing loss, but also supporting circularity and maintaining that consumer trust, right? If you're really doing a lot of direct-to-consumer products, I think that's an important element to take into account. Now, the true value here really is in combining recyclability with high barrier performance. It's not easy because I think barrier performance is very product format centric. What works for acidic beverages will not work for dairy or packaged snacks. So we are beginning to see that this type of a ripple effect coming through for packaging here. in terms of how can you actually address these true needs for active packaging. And also that's reflected around some of the questions we get asked, both for alternatives, but also looking at end of life, right? Whether it's advanced plastic recycling or looking at capacity building for some of these areas like bioplastics. An example innovation that I wanted to highlight is around the collaboration between Nestle and IBM Research. This particular partnership is looking at AI designed packaging films with really looking at digital chemistry tools. And they're going to focus on targets like heat resistance, barrier strength, and the recyclability element that I brought up. Again, this is very much a tool in progress, and it could be that it's not that easy to get all of the use cases satisfied, but it's a good indication in terms of how packaging innovation is moving towards more towards performance, taking into account the shelf life and improving that brand experience. So very much something that would evolve in 2026 going into each of these areas. I think with that, I'll pass it back to you, Josh. I think talking a little bit about some of these distinct priorities in sub-industries and maybe the regionality element.
Exactly. So you gave a great overview of kind of what each of the priorities are. Now the question is, how do those priorities fit within different industries? How are they stacking up as far as innovation goals and what companies are using to create growth? But then also regionally, what do those look like? So we're going to start with the sub-industry view, and then we're going to go into the regional view. But you can see here, we have the sub-industry view. For instance, agriculture, you can see, there's a focus on enhanced health and reduced harm. We have focus on resilience building. We have focus on growth through the bioeconomy, and see similar things for other areas. And what we're going to do is evaluate each of these, talk about them, and provide an example that really helps to understand where companies are focusing their innovation agenda, particularly as it relates to growth. And again, starting with agriculture here, I think the best example is not necessarily about enhanced health, reduced harm, resilience building, or growth of bioeconomy, but the fact that companies are leveraging purposeful innovation as the key enabler to make each of those connect and create growth. And Corteva is an interesting example of this, for one, because the company is simplifying its organization. It's now splitting into two new organizations, New Corteva, which will be its pesticide and input organization, as well as Spinco, which is going to be a seed organization. But kind of combining those two things is this new technology, CARL. Now, CARL is noted as a Corteva Agronomic Research Library, and what it's going to be is a GPT-based asset that's not only going to help for innovation, but also help products reach the market. So think about sales and other users in the field, agronomists, having tools that make sure that products work as effectively as they can in the field. They have all the data that Corteva is currently aware of on its existing products, and you can then use those to make decisions. Now, it doesn't just stop there. You could also use those to innovate. And the great thing about GPTs is you could always add more information, right, to the information you have in there. So it's these living, breathing types of innovation platforms or product use platforms that are really changing the game, connecting the dots, as Harini said. And that's exactly what purposeful innovation is leading. So this is an area to watch for in agriculture moving forward, the use of LLMs, the use of GPTs, and how they're going to enable better product use in the future. Now, as we move down the value chain here or across it, we can get into the supply chain. And here's where resilience building is the key focus. As we said, companies are really solidifying key goals that align to sustainability, but in doing so, instead of tackling sustainability as this broad, very nebulous topic, are focused down on key needs. And one of the questions that often arises, well, how do you do that? And I think as we think about supply chain, the challenges here, and we think about innovation that's targeting the ag value chain in particular, what we see is that, well, we have a lot of technologies out there, but having a lot of technologies is not necessarily good because you end up with highly diverse availability, regional needs. And what we need actually is consolidated platforms that are easy to use and able to have inputs. And I think companies like ADM and others are really beginning to take a hold of this. For instance, ADM is really now looking for practical solutions that connect growers and their needs. As I said, if you're trying to find technologies to do that, you want to find partners that are consolidated. And the great thing is in agriculture, we're beginning to see more consolidation. And as ADM continues to do this, the goal is not to look for necessarily innovative technologies, to look for practical technologies. So again, moving to the core. And when you think about the core in supply chain, it's about understanding the financial performance. It's about understanding quality, availability of resources. And that's exactly what ADM is doing. And I think it's a great case study to say, is this a period where we need brand new innovation, or is it a period where we need to use what we have smarter? And I think it's the former there. Now, as we move towards agri-food and health, it's clear, as I said before, that enhanced health and reduced harm is the core lever to pull. What does that look like today? Well, we're seeing this really advance further, right? I think Danone's a good example here, where they've recently acquired the Akkermansia company. So here's a microbe that is paramount to improving gut health, but also it actually becomes integrated into the gut lining. Why is that important? Well, it's important because it'll stay in the gut and continue to improve gut health. But the challenge, as you see in the quote here, is not necessarily that we have well-backed claims. It's also, how convinced are people that they need or have a healthy gut microbiome? Well, 1 in 2 people may not know that, so 50%, right? So if that's the case, what do we do moving forward? And this is where I think Danone's changed the game with the One Biome initiative here, where it's developing this new research center that's going to be working with these new acquisitions it's making to really show consumers that you can have a healthy gut microbiome, the products can help, and here is what one looks like. That is a major step change in what it looks like to innovate, and it's something we really need to watch, this formation of new research assets that are going to help in the future to not just show that products can be effective, but also show consumers that they can be effective for them. So major game shift there. But that's at the sort of industry level. What about the regional level? How is innovation happening, across the Americas, APAC, and MEA? And there are a lot of differences here. Sort of starting in the Americas, I think the big change here is mergers and acquisitions. This has been the major shift, and we've seen a lot of different examples. And the one I'll point out to, in this case, as I said, enhanced health and reduced harm is the major lever to pull. Keurig Dr. Pepper recently acquired Ghost. So right here we have this fresh, vital energy company in Ghost. And the interesting thing is not just that, they acquired this company, is that they're giving this brand the independence it needs to continue to grow, right? We have this $500 million company. It's got a great energy drink, which is really connecting with consumers, but it doesn't just have that. It also has connections to the supplement industry. And one thing I think we've been seeing is that as we look to innovation in the future, we need to think about the core. We need to think about claims that already exist, because novelty is really challenging to bring to market. So how do we work with the supplements industry in order to understand how we can bring those into products to affect things like mood, health, sleep, and really expand product portfolios, not necessarily in a novel way, but in a way that is predictable and impactful to consumers. And I think this is a really good example of what that looks like. I would really watch the growth of Ghost, because they're going to be a good indicator of how well companies can continue to penetrate into the supplement industry and add those products to existing products. In APAC, we have this focus on resilience building. And APAC has struggled in this regard. We've got a lot of startups in the area, a lot of startups in the region, but many of them struggle to grow beyond, small markets like Singapore, for instance. And this is the example I want to bring up, which is that now we see potential looking outside of APAC and bringing technology into the region. And Temasek, a major funder in the region, is working with two different groups: Narasa, which is a Singapore-based innovation group that is looking for new innovators to bring into the region, and a Canadian organization in this case. Now, the Canadian organization is bringing in technologies that are ready to be scaled, and this could be anything from single cell proteins, it can be genetics, a lot of different things. So using that entire technology portfolio that Canada has and bringing it to Asia. This is a brand new focus, and it shows how important resilience is to the region, because now, with challenges in growing startups in the region, they're looking abroad and looking for new money pots, new technology pots abroad to bring into the region. And so, I think what we can note from this is that, we really need to look at APAC as a core force behind technologies to support resilience building. So, follow this, follow these two organizations at large, and really hope to see benefits here, because if this is a model that works, I think it's one that we might see expand and bring affordable protein to challenged regions of the world. Lastly, we have EMEA. I think the major storyline here is around biomanufacturing. The reality is EMEA is struggled in this regard, but with the Americas kind of backing off its biomanufacturing, with the APAC kicking its up, EMEA wants to be competitive. And so EIT Food is going to be launching again its European Agrifood Biotech Alliance in 2026, and that's going to be aimed at helping support targeting the right innovations to overcome biomanufacturing bottlenecks in the region to support growth. So this is, again, an important one to watch, because it will set the tone for what EMEA does likely moving forward around biomanufacturing. So the question now is what do we do? How can you capitalize on this next era of agri-food and health innovation that we've laid out? And I want to pass it to Harini to conclude out the talk for today. Harini?
Absolutely. I think those are great, regional trends. But if you want to take one of those themes into account, or priorities, I'm going to walk you through like health is a priority. And if you want to navigate this next era of agri-food and health, what do you have to do there? So just as an example, think about three main areas, right? So number one is understanding your adjacencies. If you're a food company, you need clear visibility into which health territories can you credibly expand into. But if you're a consumer health company, on the other hand, you may want to understand which other novel use cases you can actually go into. So this is where our Lux Consumer Health Radar really helps map where some of those consumer needs intersect with your existing and emerging capabilities. What it can help you do is really enable to identify the health outcomes and tying it back to the functionality for your products, right? Whether it's for metabolic health or gut health or cognitive performance. So this is number one, to think about really understanding your adjacencies. Number two is understanding, and I would even say analyzing your unmet challenges for a particular area. Now, Josh brought up a great example of microbiome modulation and how it's pretty challenging still to be able to truly personalize microbiome-based products. Now, in this case, for food companies or even ingredient companies who really want to truly make a change in this microbiome based products, really have to choose whether you can build your own capability or you partner with upstream players. Again, for an area like microbiome analysis, it's truly important to understand the challenges for doing it all by yourself. So partnering would be a better opportunity. But having such an unmet challenge analyzed and then creating that roadmap to understand where do you actually go is truly important area to look into if you want to go further for health enhanced product portfolio development. The last thing I wanted to bring is also to move from functionality to true market opportunity. I think this is important in areas like sugar reduction, which are pretty well established. But if you're thinking about the next generation of better for you products, I think it's going to increasingly rely on some of those drop-in sweetener blends, whether you're thinking about rare sugars or sweet proteins. But it's important to balance that performance with the retail price. So what's the true demand, and how can you actually prepare yourself today? So together, you can really form that roadmap where you have to invest in what type of technologies or players you have to prioritize. With that, I would just like to spend a minute to talk about some of the key takeaways. I think it's very clear that agri-food innovation is becoming more grounded. With all the data that we shared today, it's really not about chasing the new, but it's more about strengthening the core. Anything that would add value, addressing health, resilience, and scalability of ingredients. We're also seeing that the companies which are actually going forward are the ones which are linking health first innovation alongside supply chain stability and all of this bio-based growth pathways. We'll continue to see that for areas like health, success will actually come from tracking some of those adjacencies and how we can connect that back to the unmet needs and tying it to the functional performance. With that, I thank you all and pass it back to Josh.
Thank you, Harini. So now we have time, I think, for maybe one question. So if you have questions, please please type them into the questions box. If we don't get them on this call, we'll get to them offline. But let's see. I think the first one we have in here is around biomanufacturing. You brought that up, Harini. So with interest in biomanufacturing kind of rising again, what innovations do we need to focus on to solve the existing bottlenecks and actually scale these things so we can build businesses around them?
Yeah, I mean, this is one which we get asked a lot, I would say. And right now, from how things have been progressing, I would put my bets in three areas, right? Number one is exploring alternative hosts. And this could be anything beyond like the traditional bacteria and the filamentous fungi. For instance, oleaginous yeast are really good, intrinsically high in triglycerides for microbial oils and high value lipids. And you don't actually have to sometimes genetically modify them. You can actually use other types of methodologies to be able to help secrete those lipids, right? So that's one area. The second one is continuous fermentation. I think still in early stages. It's more on that kind of how do you move and evolve from fed batch to continuous. We've seen startups like Coldron doing a bit of that progress, but it's still very much in the early stage. Last but not the least, I think it's evergreen feedstock diversification. I think I would definitely put my money there for 2026 because that's needed.
Absolutely. So focus on the things that again, help us scale and help us be a little bit more agile in those biomanufacturing. So again, thanks, Harini. And if you have additional questions, we have lots more details to talk about as far as those go. So please reach out and we'd be happy to talk to you. But that concludes our webinar for today. The slides and the presentation from the recording will all be sent to all the attendees via email. And after leaving the webinar, as always, you're going to be prompted to complete a survey on today's presentation. We always appreciate any feedback you have because it informs what we do for future webinars. Also, take a moment and check out our upcoming webinars on our website. But again, thanks for joining us. Have a great day.